Hello again, everyone. Welcome back. I trust everybody had a good morning. Some good conversations, great workshops. Well, we're glad to have you back here. I just wanted to let everybody know, I know a lot of people are seated and already eating. The main course is on its way out. You'll see it come out here. So feel free to keep on eating and then become completely silent when Chris Castro comes up here. So this is our closing luncheon, so we have our keynote speaker coming up. You are not going to be disappointed. We're very, very excited for this. But before I actually move on to that, I'm going to say something that's not written on here because a lot of the stuff that's written here was written by Gina. And everybody, I hope you've met Gina Bell so far. So it is time to thank Gina Bell. Wonderful. You know, Gina she really is a one-woman show in a lot of ways for this, but there are some people that I think it's important that we also thank along with her. There's some folks that are right out here at the desk that you've seen over and over again. Their names are Molly Urbane, Jessica Andershaw, am I saying Andershaw right? Yeah, Jessica Andershaw, and then Julie Kronlugge with Travel Dubuque is also helping us out a lot. So let's please thank them as well. There are a number of City of Dubuque staff that help with this. In some way, we all kind of pitch in, but it really is something that comes through our sustainability office, and that really is Gina and her small but very mighty team. So we're very thankful for everything that you do, Gina, and for putting this on. I've loved to hear about all the great experiences that people are having while they're here at this conference, and I really do hope that it's something that you take home with you, and it's been very thought-provoking for you. Well, I mentioned earlier, Gina and I actually had the honor of going to Dubai for COP 28 last year. And one of the things that we've talked about frequently since we came back is how it really renewed our hope and our ability to address climate change. There's, I think, times that happen where you start to think, maybe what I'm doing really isn't mattering much. Maybe it's not really having much of an impact. But we really saw in those times that it was something that was definitely impactful throughout the world in the work that we do. Being surrounded by thousands of people dedicated to taking climate action, especially young people, was incredibly inspiring. And moving forward, I personally would like to see Dubuque take on ambitious climate goals and hold steadfast that our actions not only have local impact, but also have a global one. And I hope that all of you think that as well and feel that way, because the work that you do is incredibly important. We're not alone in this fight. This moment in time is critical, but we have the support of each other and huge opportunities from our federal government to ensure that we address the environmental concerns, grow our economy at the same time, and ensure equitable transitions to a truly just world. Which brings us to our keynote speaker. Chris Castro is the Chief of Staff for the Office of State and Community Energy Programs at the U.S. Department of Energy. Chris previously served as the Senior Advisor to Mayor Buddy Dyer and Director of Sustainability and Resilience at the City of Orlando, Florida. Chris is well known for his entrepreneurial efforts prior to joining the city, and this includes being the co-founder and president of several companies and organizations, including the global sustainability nonprofit Ideas for Us, a clean energy consulting firm, Citizen Energy, and a renowned urban farming social enterprise, Fleet Farming. He's a guy with a little bit of energy, you're going to find out. In 2020, Chris also joined partners as a founding director to launch Climate First Bank, the first B-Corp community bank in Florida working to advance ESG and local investing for sustainability and decarbonization solutions. He's originally from Miami, Florida. Chris holds a BS in environmental science and policy from the University of Central Florida. And I've had a great opportunity to spend some time with them these last 2 days, and I'm really looking forward to our keynote speaker, Chris Castro.
Thank you so much. All right, hello Dubuque. All right, I've been waiting for this day for actually over a year. It's funny enough, Gina reached out to me, I think it was like May of 2023, or maybe it was around after your last conference. And she's like, Chris, I need to put this on your radar and make sure that you're out here. And sure enough, we were able to make it happen. So good afternoon to you all. Thank you again for the invitation, the warm welcome to this beautiful city. This is my first time visiting the state of Iowa, and certainly the city of Dubuque. And I've been really impressed, obviously before coming here and learning from you all, but Dubuque's been on the radar for quite some time, a big reason because of Gina and the team's work here. And it's really exciting because you all are truly growing a healthier, cleaner, more sustainable community starting right here in the backyard of Dubuque. So big props to Mayor Kavanaugh, to the Dubuque council members, Gina, and the team for pulling this all together. This afternoon is a jam-packed session of information. I'm going to have a lot of info sharing about everything that's going on at the Department of Energy, this evolution that we're currently fielding right now. And before I do so, though, I'm going to briefly share a little bit about my journey, about how I got here. A lot of people often ask me how I got to this current seat here, and so I'll share a little bit about my entrepreneurial journey to get here as well. But I want to dive into eventually what Dubuque and the state of Iowa could take advantage of as it relates to the moment that we're in to accelerate an equitable and just clean energy future. So I come at this work from a very unconventional and unique background. I'm a second-generation Cuban American, born and raised in Miami, Florida. I actually grew up on a palm tree farm in Homestead, Florida. My parents still own a nursery down there by the Homestead Speed Track, for those who follow NASCAR. We got a bunch of palm tree nurseries around there. And so I grew up with this visceral experience, unlike a lot of people, to really build this relationship with the natural world. And it has eventually caught up to me, right? And over the last 2 years, I've really had the honor of serving as a Biden-Harris appointee here with this administration, working alongside, of course, our fabulous Secretary Jennifer Granholm, and really helping to create a new federal programs office, managing a large portfolio of funding and technical assistance to help us accelerate this exciting new direction. And I've been at this for over 18 years. I've dedicated pretty much every waking moment to advancing this future. And so to get into that, my work really first started out during my undergraduate years at the University of Central Florida. I was one of those that was an undeclared student coming into the university, not really knowing what I actually wanted to do, and I stumbled an environmental sociology course. Dr. Penelope Canan, this lady is still my mentor, unbelievably just gave me the epiphany, helped me find my passion and my interest in advancing clean energy. And following that, I immediately started to mobilize the student body around trying to put pressure on my university to commit to climate neutrality. There was a big President's Climate Commitment movement going on at the university level, and after passing a student referendum and going to the Board of Governors and going to the Board of Trustees, sure enough, we got that passed, and it became my aha moment that we, as students, can actually influence the future of our university. And it had me get very involved on campus. We built our first climate action plan, a sustainability action plan, and what I realized was there was a big gap in how we were trying to mobilize the students to get involved in advancing these solutions. And so I created, at the time, was the first student organization for Ideas for Us. It was at the University of Central Florida, and we created a registered student club, and the whole idea was this interdisciplinary, almost sustainability firm on a campus that was not just protesting and engaging in civil disobedience, which sometimes is important, but also actually coming up with solutions. The Adopt a Pond, Adopt a Road program, starting to apply for solar, starting the on-campus garden and composting initiative, tailgates for our recycling for our tailgate programs, and the list goes on. Real practical things that people can do to make an impact. And Ideas for Us grew like wildfire. Today, this organization is a UN-accredited NGO, global nonprofit organization operating in about 30 countries around the world, branches and chapters of people in communities all over that are coming together every single month, creating ideas, and then this mothership, Ideas for Us, is helping to fund these projects all over the place to advance sustainability and the sustainable development goals. That really was a foundation for me in getting involved in this. But I was also interested in clean energy in this transition, and I started to get really excited about alternative biofuels. Obviously, being here in Iowa, you guys are the home of ethanol and the biofuel movement, which is incredible. And I started getting really interested in how we could use waste products to grow fuel, primarily through algae. Right? How do we actually take point source emissions from power plants and factories, sequester those, and grow them in essentially cisterns that grew algae and turn that algae into fuel products? And sure enough, a lot of the fossil fuels that we're using today, that we're taking out of the ground, was because of the oxygen revolution 2.5 million years ago, because of algae that bloomed all over this country, sank and turned into petrotrains, right? And now we're taking it out of the ground and burning it. How can we actually accelerate that in a matter of hours and create fuel from this waste, right? That was my first interest in clean energy, and it had me apply to a 2-year work study at the Department of Energy. It was one of those, like, you're up at 1 in the morning and stumble on something, you're like, oh, that's interesting, let me just throw my name in the hat. And sure enough, I ended up getting called by the DOE to go up for 2 consecutive summers and engage as a fellow and really immerse myself in this transition. Now, if you remember in 2009, what was going on then? The American, right? The Recovery Act was passed, the first investment in this transition to clean energy to start laying the groundwork primarily on the research and development for these new technologies that we needed to commercialize. It was really the beginning of what we're beginning to see now as this transition. So I went up there. I actually ended up getting selected by the secretary at that time, Stephen Chu, as a student ambassador. So they selected 10 of these fellows that came up that summer to go out and be the reps for the department, go to career fairs, inspire students to apply to the same program, like get out there and tell the story of DOE's transition. And I ended up launching a number of projects on campus to get students involved in energy projects, and one of them was called Kill a Watt. Obviously, kilowatt is the pun. It was a dorm room energy challenge, and we had students competing to use behavioral changes to save energy. Well, in 3 months, we saved the university $55,000, and the president came to me and said, what? Can we do that again? Like, what's going on here? And it got on the radar of course, I'm an ambassador, so I'm sending these stories up to DOE. Sure enough, they're like, that's incredible. Let's highlight the story. And the secretary posted it, and it becomes this viral effort. The next year, I go up and I get to really dive into our technology office, the buildings technology office, and all of the new tech that's going into our facilities to make them more efficient and to decarbonize them. I got to do a stint in the solar energy technology office and look at the next generation of bifacial panels and how we were moving in all forms, even things like photovoltaics, floating solar, which I ended up installing a lot of. And ultimately, those experiences led me to my first big risk, my first big jump, and that was to create a startup right out of college. I decided to take my education and this experience and say, I can apply this in the private sector and help businesses start to save money by investing in clean energy. And so I created a company called Citizen Energy, still operates today in the DC Metro and parts of California, and it is helping commercial and multifamily and apartment complexes to change their lighting, to change their HVAC systems, to install solar and EV charging, and really do the development work, right, to actually help turn these projects and get the experience on how to bring financing, on how to choose a certain technology for your solution, and really work with the private sector. The mayor also mentioned that urban ag is an interest of mine, and one of the other passions that came out of ideas for us was how do we convert our neighborhoods into agrihoods. I always had this epiphany that like our development is actually eating away at the American farmland in America about 2,000 to 3,000 acres per day. Okay, for development. If we continue on this track, the question is like, how are we going to feed ourselves? And then I was like, well, maybe we can start to bring it back localized. Obviously, we have urban farms, but what if we hyper-localize it, convert our lawns into edible landscapes, and actually use bike power, zero-emission agriculture to maintain, to harvest, to process, and to sell hyper-locally in less than a 5-mile radius? Well, we launched fleet farming. Today, it turned 10 years old in February, and we have 6 full-time urban farmers hired in Orlando managing 60 different households that are growing significant amounts of food. And now this model is replicating. It's in Uganda, it's in Kenya, it's in different communities throughout Florida, and it's becoming a new type of urban ag, a new type of solution. to get people. And the cool thing is we host a bike ride, by the way, every 2 weeks. We call it the Swarm. We go around like bees swarming around the community on bikes, and you got your grandmother with her grandkid out there literally on the ground harvesting and teaching their, it's amazing. It is the transformation that we need, right? It's the community engagement that we need to make this work. Lastly, before I really knew it, all of this great work that I was doing was almost for naught, because I realized that my money was still sitting in a bank account that was still financing the next pipeline without my choice, right? And I said, how are we going to solve this problem if even me, who's giving every ounce to this issue, if even I'm still contributing to the problem? There's no way to solve it unless we create a new model for banking. And that became the idea behind Climate First Bank, the first benefit corporation bank in the state of Florida. And the whole idea is our collective deposits could actually be going to invest for good, a bank as a force for good, right? So now Climate First Bank is about to approach its 3rd year of existence. It's the fastest growing bank in the United States right now. And it's a climate bank. And it's just restricted to Florida until June. Just wait. This is going to take off. And this model is going to replicate. FDIC said this is a new model we've never seen in the history of this country. You're going to use a new type of mechanism to kind of invest in the future. So obviously, you only can get a loan for a vehicle if it's a plug-in vehicle. You only can get a loan for a new home if it's an Energy Star certified home. We have specific lending for retrofitting buildings, which most banks don't, right? And you have and the best rooftop solar lending platform right now in the country. Perfect timing, right? Timing often is everything. Most of my experience in urban sustainability actually was right before I got here to DC, and that was in the city of Orlando. And from 2013 till June 2022, I served as Mayor Dyer's senior advisor and the director of sustainability and resilience, the Office of Sustainability and Resilience, and really put Orlando on the map in a very tough state that doesn't necessarily engage in these types of progressive, sustainability movements. But for some reason, Orlando was quickly rising in the ranks as one of the leading cities in the country doing this work. And it was because I was trying to approach this from an entrepreneurial standpoint. A lot of the programs we implemented in the city were about how do we drive revenue or save money and at the same time solve a social or environmental issue. That's social entrepreneurship at its core, right? Not just creating a gadget to create a gadget, but doing something to solve a problem, but at the same time make money. So Greenworks Orlando, certainly look it up. There's a tremendous amount of examples that we have, but it really gave me the foundation. And sure enough, March of 2022, I ended up getting an email from the White House. And as all of us know, being trained in cybersecurity, phishing emails are quite rampant. And I was looking at this email, I'm like, I haven't applied to work for the federal government. And somehow it says I'm a finalist as a chief of staff at the Department of Energy. Click this link to show your availability. CIO, flag, right? And before I did, though, I ended up calling the number at the bottom of that signature. And sure enough, it was the White House Office of Presidential Personnel. And they said, no, that's a legitimate email. If you're interested, click the button, let's play. And I ended up doing 7 interviews until June of 2022 when I got a final offer to basically come to the Department of Energy and use your entrepreneurship to build a new federal programs office at the Department of Energy that takes advantage of this moment and helps us to accelerate an equitable clean energy transition. How do I say no to that? How do I say no to the pleasure? First of all, when I told the mayor, he's like, you gotta go, right? Like, you gotta get out of here. See ya. And sure enough, I have 2 little girls. I moved the whole family up to DC in a matter of like 4 weeks and started July 15th, and it's been off to the races since then. I'll tell you, that's where I started out. And this is the current class of presidential appointees at the U.S. Department of Energy, with Secretary Granholm right there, front and center. So I accepted this presidential appointment not because It was obviously an honor to be called to service by the president, but because prior decade plus of organizing and marching literally on Capitol Hill and engaging in getting us to this moment, I mean, we have the funding, we have the political will, we have the consumer interest, we unfortunately have the urgency of the climate crisis on us. Now is the moment that we have been waiting for, that those who started the environmental movement in the 1970s have been asking for, that those millennials who came up and started marching and protesting on campus have been pushing. Now is it. Now is it. We're living it. And of course, the president and the department have put out the most bold and ambitious goals to help us address this problem. So here are the main goals that I wake up every single day thinking about at the Department of Energy. So the top 3 things that we're striving for. One is hitting our near-term reduction targets of 50 to 52% reduction of our emissions compared to 2005 levels, right? That's the baseline. And doing so by the year 2030, moving us to 100% carbon-free clean energy electric grid by 2035, and continuing our trajectory to a net zero economy by 2050. These are the science-based targets that we're after and that we are relentlessly pursuing. So the good news is that President Biden and Congress have delivered in the most historic way that any country has done in the history of this world. And that is by passing 3 of the most critical climate and clean energy legislations we've ever seen. First and foremost was the bipartisan infrastructure law. We often call that the bill, right? And that started out by investing in our workers, enabling capital to start rebuilding and making our infrastructure more resilient. And it really kicked off this recipe for an industrial economic transition for the United States. We are moving and pivoting this country, and it will take a few decades, but we are at the very early stage of moving to a carbon-free economy in this country. And so that was the seed. Secondly, that was November 2021, right? Summer 2022, the CHIPS and Science Act is passed. This is about investing in our domestic manufacturing of semiconductor chips, because we know that every technology, whether it's our cell phones or EV charging stations or solar or your heat pump, they all require semiconductor chips, and we're dependent on hostile nations for them. How can we sustain that unless we onshore that supply and we domestically produce here? It's a big part of the key to solving this problem. And then the third one is the Inflation Reduction Act. That's a consumer and business-facing law that's focused on enabling historic tax credits and rebates so that we can actually now take advantage of the marketplace that's being built. So you got infrastructure money, you got manufacturing and workforce development money, and you have incentives for consumers and businesses to take advantage of those technologies that we're producing here. This is the recipe for an industrial economic strategy. So it wasn't enough, though, to enable these dollars, right? President Biden and Vice President Harris knew that in order for us to catalyze this strategy, we needed to focus on supporting those that were furthest behind. Tribes, rural and remote communities, territories, historically disadvantaged communities like our Black, Hispanic, Indigenous populations. These who have been without access, who have been burdened, underinvested in, underserved. And so Justice 40 was passed just a few days into this administration with a focus on making sure that 40% of everything that we passed, minimum, flowed to historically disadvantaged communities. 40% minimum. We at the White House and the Department of Energy have created actually a mapping tool called CEGIS, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, and it helps to demystify where, across this country, does it mean to be a Justice 40 community? There are a number of factors that contribute. It's not just, am I an energy burden, but it takes into account housing and workforce opportunities, and transportation burden, and legacy pollution, and you name it, economic issues. And now you can zoom into a map and actually begin to identify where we should prioritize these investments to have the biggest impact, to actually align with this. Now, why is that important? Well, we know historically, from an environmental injustice perspective, exposure to air pollution that is created by primarily white white populations is inhaled by Black and Hispanics at 50 and 60% in terms of exposures. So there's a huge gap in the amount of air pollution that our minority populations are being exposed to. Secondly, from an energy injustice standpoint, we have this looming issue of high energy burdens in our low-income communities, in our renter households, in our senior households, and in our minority populations. And it comes down to, when you actually look at the data, these communities are spending 2, 3+ times as much as their affluent counterparts in household energy bills. And they have less resources by a significant amount, but they're spending more, 2, 3 times. As you can imagine, this is like insult to injury, right? Because these groups are already limited in their abilities. And so this is often due to a lot of things, and I'm not going to get into it, but it's everything from the lack of energy efficiency systems in their homes, the lack of the interest of the landlord, this landlord-tenant complex, or split incentive, we call it in the movement, of not wanting to invest in that technology because I'm not going to benefit from it, although I own the building, right? So there's a bunch of issues that are leading to this, right? We also, from a standpoint of accessing clean energy, are seeing a pretty wide disparity in these same populations having much less installed solar when you look at it from a census tract perspective. And lastly, from a climate justice perspective, these minority populations have the highest levels of climate impacts. They're burdened on the front end with these high bills and exposure. They're impacted often first with these storms and these floods and fires, et cetera, and then they're often last to recover. And so we have this kind of compounding issue, which is why it is so critical that we have, put equity and energy justice at the forefront of this transition. So much so that the Department of Energy, the only agency right now, although we're trying to replicate this, we have institutionalized this in our DNA. And every single grant that the DOE has offered requires what's called a community benefits plan. This community benefits plan requires the applicant to say, well, how am I going to advance Justice 40? How am I going to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in my workforce and who I'm working with? What about how I'm creating good jobs that are quality jobs, that are good paying, free and fair of choice, and how we can organize? These are all important aspects of creating a society that's thriving for everyone. And so this is important. It's not just a plan that you have to submit. It's upwards of 20% of the merit review, whether you get the grant or not. So this is serious. And the goal is to get other agencies to try to replicate this across the country. So this is getting me now into this kind of evolution that we're fielding at the Department of Energy. So back to DOE. Out of the $500 billion that I said was enabled through these laws, about $100 billion of new funding has come to the Department of Energy and essentially forced our leadership, Secretary Granholm, Deputy Secretary Turk, to think differently about how we're organized. And in fact, in 2022, DOE went through a historic realignment and created a brand new pillar. In gold there, the Undersecretary for Infrastructure, or S3, is a new function at the Department of Energy. Because historically, DOE has been a research and development agency. We have these 17 national labs. We're behind the curtain doing all the technology research to get it commercialized. DOE is not like EPA that has regional offices, or USDA that has sanctions almost in every county. We're a different agency, but it's requiring us, this $100 billion is literally requiring us to change our mission, to add to our mission. Now we're a research, development, deployment, and demonstration agency that's focused on equitable clean energy transitions. Now, this S3 pillar encompasses 9 program offices ranging from Indian Energy that works with tribal governments, to FEMP, the Federal Energy Management Program that works with federal agencies to do retrofits and clean energy projects, to things like CSER, which is more around cybersecurity and energy security. And of course, as we start distributing our generation and moving towards clean energy, there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of threats that these systems can play. And so CSER is critical. But we see this new pillar as a critical piece of accelerating the clean energy transition in 4 different ways. One is it's funding to expand affordable clean energy for all. We're working to renew the American manufacturing base, create jobs and these community benefits, and catalyzing the private sector investment. Because at the end of the day, as we say at DOE, this transition is government-enabled, but private sector-led. There's no way that we can invest in our way out of this with public resources. Zero. We need trillions of dollars to do this in the coming decades. And so the goal is to de-risk the private sector investment market, to say, now I can understand how to make money out of this at scale, right? And that's the key aspect that we're currently in right now. This $100 billion has come and essentially wrapped a significant amount of scope around the money that's here. It's focused on decarbonizing, obviously, and growing the American industry, ensuring resilience of the grid. It's investing in workforce, hydrogen, energy communities. It's very broad. And the good news is we're beginning to see some new offices created to help this transition. I've talked already about this need for manufacturing and energy supply chains. And this new office of MESC essentially is helping to do that, to focus on kind of this late stage technology development and investing in onshoring the supply and boosting that domestic manufacturing here in the United States. And they're also investing in the workforce through direct funding for cutting-edge manufacturing programs at universities. Things like industrial assessment centers that are training students on how to become trained to go out to manufacturing plants and big commercial facilities and do energy audits and help them save energy and money, right? Then you have this Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. This office really handles a lot of the big money around hydrogen hubs and direct air capture and long duration storage. The whole goal of this office is to use the money to demonstrate projects at scale. Take a lab scale demonstration, and now let's actually show it to be a real world scale demonstration so that the market can really accelerate and lift off. Right, and so again, they have a huge amount of money. The one I did want to point to is at the bottom left there, and it's the energy improvements in rural and remote areas. It's $1 billion for communities that are actually 10,000 population and less. It's specifically for small communities that often have very little resources, don't have a sustainability manager, or often the mayor's also the fire chief, right? And so you have situations where we really need to begin investing in those communities too. This is a part of making sure we get to those that are furthest behind. And then that brings me to SCEP, this new Office of State and Community Energy Programs. This is where I've had the honor of coming in. I came in July of 2022, like I said, as employee one for this new office. Today, we have 157 federal employees, 96 contractors, 36 fellows, and a handful of interns. This has been in about 18 months. It has been quite the roller coaster, to say the least. SCEP is really unique because our mission is very new to the scope of DOE, and that is, how do we partner with state, local governments, tribal governments, and community institutions to help fund clean energy projects and provide them the tools, the technical assistance to help them make this transition, revitalize their economy, attract jobs, create the creative class, right? Everything that we're all striving to do through the lens of clean energy. Right? We're managing $16 billion of the bill, the IRA, and base funding. So it's a huge portfolio of grants. And here essentially is how we've organized our shop. We have 7 different divisions within SCEP, and they range from the weatherization assistance program and supporting low-income households all across the country to do these retrofits. So we fund every county government in the US to do this work, to the State Energy Program, which is an annual state grant that goes to all 50 states, 5 territories in DC to have an energy office, but to also do these clean energy programs. And then we have community energy pillars, which really starts to open up new money that goes directly into cities and tribes and school districts and nonprofit organizations all across the country. So really exciting, 28 different grant programs that we've lifted up and created over the last 18 months to get this money out the door. And it's really exciting because SCEP doesn't come at this from a single technology perspective, right? Our office is technology neutral as long as it's clean energy and decarbonizing the economy, right? So we come with all of the tools of DOE's tool belt to a conversation with the City of Dubuque or whatever community that we're talking to, and really try to help plug and connect those dots. Here's a simple bubble chart that shows some of the big buckets of funding out of those 28. And you could see one of the biggest ones, the biggest one, is the home energy rebates. These are soon to be starting to flow to states all across the country that are going to help consumers retrofit their homes with better air conditioning and heaters, better water heaters, better appliances. And by the way, these are point of sale rebates, so they come off the top at the big box store or with your contractor. I will say the state of Iowa is in the process of applying. We've spoken to the state. We just had a good meeting with them just a couple of weeks ago in early April, and it looks like they are going to be applying here over the course of the summer and potentially enabling these towards the end of this year or Q1 of next year in 2025. This is a big deal. This is a big deal. Dubuque has a role. What is that role? Distribution channel. We need to make sure we get to the right neighborhoods, to the right communities, to the right residents, make sure that they're aware about them, and that we take advantage of trying to braid and stack these opportunities. A home that can get weatherized through weatherization assistance is also able to benefit from these home energy rebates too. And they could benefit from the new Solar for All program that just came out from EPA earlier this year. Shout out EPA, right? So there is a significant opportunity for deep transformation of these households that, by the way, as I mentioned earlier, are in disproportionate impact as it relates to energy cost, right? This is the best thing that we can do. If we could solve it for them, we could solve it for everyone. That's the mindset, right? So in addition to the home energy rebates, of course, the weatherization assistance is massive. We have the $1 billion for building codes to help cities, counties, and states with upgrading their codes as long as they have the legal authority to do so. And then a bunch of, it looks small, but $550 million is still a huge amount, right, for schools and nonprofits and workforce programs all across the country. So, SCEP has a few key objectives in accelerating this work. First and foremost, we're starting with enabling that clean energy money, right? We manage a bunch of these grants. And so that's our constitutional, our statutory obligation from Congress. You have to manage this money. And so we have a wide-ranging portfolio, again, that I've been talking through to help those states with that process. Here is the formula money going to the state of Iowa, just out of my office alone. Okay, it's over almost $140 million that Iowa already has earmarked, meaning they don't have to actually competitively compete for that money. They already have it. It's locked in. They have to apply. You have to tell us how you're going to use the money in alignment with the statute, how Congress wrote, but they have the money, right? And it's everything from SCEP is the state energy program, so that's that flexible state money that they can use. They can re-grant it. They can help improve their own operations, et cetera. You have the revolving loan funds, $6 million that the state's going to get to help create a low-cost pool of capital to help local governments and nonprofits to do clean energy projects and now have a very low-cost capital pool. They have the efficiency and electrification rebates you just talked about. $120 million of that is just the rebates. Okay, those are the rebates that are going to go to consumers. And then TREC, which is a training program, $2 million to help think about how do we train the next generation of our contractors, focused on small business and minority contractors, so that they can take advantage of the wealth building opportunity that we're in right now. This whole transformation of the home, of our communities towards clean energy, right? They have to, one thing I learned when I was going through this is, a heat pump water heater, it requires a new skill set for a plumber. It's no longer an electric resistance. There's refrigerants that now are in a heat pump that a plumber has never touched in their life and never known about. And guess what? Refrigerants have global warming potentials, right? They're a greenhouse gas too. And so now we have to think about how to mitigate potential unintended consequence by putting a bunch of heat pumps all over the place. If we install them the wrong way, it's going to create a problem, right? We need to make sure that these contractors are trained appropriately to install the right technologies. That's the key. We're also enhancing the capacity. This is where I get excited too. The capacity of local governments and communities. We often hear, I don't have the warm body in my community to actually apply for these grants or to think about and convene my partners and think a strategy for my plan. What can I do? Well, we're starting to get creative. And when I was in Orlando, we succeeded in landing a couple big grants from the Bloomberg Philanthropies. One of them was called the American Cities Climate Challenge. And part of that grant is you got $2.5 million, but you also got a full-time energy advisor for 3 years paid for by the foundation. Game changer. we were able to accelerate probably 10 years of work in 3 because I had an extra person to be able to lean in 24/7 doing that while I'm off doing, water or urban ag stuff and they're doing the, right? So there's a lot, as Gina knows, that you're having to manage as sustainability. It's not just energy. So what we're doing is using our technical assistance money to hire fellows in communities. And we're doing that in a couple different ways. We've partnered with AmeriCorps. We've created a new Clean Energy Service Corps program. We're deploying Vista, like fellows, in communities, specifically these energy transition communities, to help them with capacity, to help them organize, to help them convene and write grants and think about project pipelines. We're also funding those who are getting EECBG grants, which Dubuque is. You all have an ability of applying for an 18-month Clean Energy Fellow, a Community Energy Fellow. The 3rd round will be coming up this fall, so I want to make sure that it's on your radar. And ultimately, again, DOE will fund an energy expert in your community. And we also just funded 12 Arctic energy ambassadors. So Alaska is broken out into 12 Alaskan Native regional corporations, and we've now placed an energy expert in each one of those 12 ANRCs so that they can work on everything that I just talked about. Having a dedicated liaison goes a long way in being able to secure these resources. So I'm excited about building the capacity in communities. And speaking of formula funding, Dubuque is getting this $123,000 directly from DOE, not through the state. Big props on that. And Gina tells me that we're gonna be putting solar on a pump station over in the B branch, right? In this kind of new B branch area that you guys built out. Sorry. Spam's calling again. So really exciting that right. I know, I remember, that you all are landing this, and again, a great example of how to use these dollars to kind of continue your journey moving forward. The other cool thing about some of this money is we're starting to open up new pathways for like very unconventional partners, K through 12 schools, universities, and nonprofits. DOE has never had money in the 46 years that it's been around to actually fund school districts or nonprofit organizations like our food banks and our childcare facilities and our homeless facilities. They've never had money to help them with projects to improve their facilities. Well, guess what? Now we do. And it has been probably the most subscribed and applied for grants that we have in all of our portfolio. Okay, we had in the first round of schools money was $80 million to do retrofits in schools. We got 1,000 concept papers, 360 full applications, and $6 billion worth of funding requests for $80 million that we had. I was like, what? 70 times as much money. My goal now is to go to Congress, which I've been on the Hill a lot lately, to say, how do we start rolling the one-time base money into ongoing annual appropriations for our schools, for our nonprofits, right? How do we continue moving this forward? That's how we solve this problem. Right? So very exciting to see the schools and the nonprofits getting funded. And of course, workforce. We can't transition without, again, educating, engaging, empowering millions of people to join this clean energy workforce. Millions. And the good news is there's a study out there that just the IRA and the bill over the next 10 years could potentially create 9 million jobs in clean energy. This is economic development. This is the opportunity for our young people who are looking for what is next and is there a future for me in this economy, right? So we manage $260 million in SCEP that really focus on the built environment. Think energy auditors, think building technicians, think those who are installing these technologies, like I said earlier, right? Those are the funds that we have and we're flowing. Some of them are going direct to nonprofits. A lot of them are going to the state energy office to then be re-granted to programs. So if you're not hearing an underlying tone here, we work very much with the state energy office. They receive a lot of our money, thanks Congress. And I will say that it's critical to do your absolute best to build a relationship so that Dubuque is on the map and is part of the strategic plan that the state has to move the economy, right? Because if you are, then their money that they get from us is eligible to go directly to you. And that's how we build these partnerships. Now, I'm coming from the state in Florida where it was challenging to do that. In the 10 years I was in the state, I got one $200,000 grant from the state. One. Success, but one. And so there's a lot there. Let's just continue to work on building positive relations with the state energy offices. And so Lastly is driving innovation in the home efficiency and electrification. I talked about the weatherization assistance program and the rebates. SCEP money doesn't just go to states and tribes and institutions, it also goes directly into the household. And that's what's really unique about this office, the wide-ranging stakeholders that we get to touch and how unique the projects really are. We can't do this unless we also enable tools and data and technical assistance, and this is where SCEP moves from just being a money manager of grants to actually being a solutions provider for these stakeholders. So we have a whole team that's been built up that's focused on technical assistance, including two very important tools. One's called SLOPE, you see at the top right there, and it's the State and Local Planning for Energy. And the other one is LEAD, a low-income energy affordability data tool. It helps you down to the census tract understand the energy burden and the household burdens that your communities are, and you can pinpoint your funding to those that can be impacted the most. One of the technical assistance programs I leaned on in Orlando was this REOPT tool. Solar Energy Innovation Network is a technical assistance program that cities can apply to, and we ended up working with the National Renewable Energy Lab to use this tool. By the way, it's open right now for anybody to use, free of charge, and REOPT evaluates the techno-economic potential of your building to add solar and storage, battery storage. It's all about resilience and being able to disconnect your building in case of an emergency or an anomaly on the grid, right? And so through this tool, we analyzed 36 properties for the city of Orlando, our fire stations, our neighborhood centers, our police stations, our city hall. And then we used that analysis and brought it forward to our CFO's team and incorporated into our CIP ongoing funding to actually begin installing solar year over year over year. We get about $2 to $3 million a year just to do clean energy projects in the city. So I think that enabling that information is the first step to understanding, and we have a lot of tools that can help you all do that. But wait, there is more. There is more. One of the biggest things, in my opinion, that came out of the IRA outside of this money is the tax credits that were enabled. This is a game changer because the next 10 years, between now and the end of 2031, all of these tax credits are available for consumers and businesses. Here's a snapshot of some of them that are available for individuals, for households. You can see everything from home energy equipment credits, things like rooftop solar and batteries now can get 30% of the cost of the installation covered. Batteries were not included in the investment tax credit before the IRA. Now they're included. If you remember, solar was on a declining scale from 30 to 26 to 22. Now it's back to 30 for the next 10 years. So we've got some market assurance that this is going to happen, that this is going to be a longer term solution. We also have tax credits for other energy saving investments, things like heat pumps and heat pump water heaters that you can now get tax credits for. And there's even a tax credit for energy audits, which basically negates the cost of doing a home energy audit. So it's essentially free. And we want to enable more people to do that because you can't manage what you don't measure. That's the first step. And so that can enable utilities and others to really offer that. Now, the big thing, in addition to the individual tax credits, is what's called elective pay. And basically what happens is now tax-exempt entities like local governments, hospitals, schools, universities, they now can take advantage of these tax credits as well. They can add it into their capital stack, and they can help to get a quicker return on these investments. You spend $1 million on solar, on a big rooftop for your parking garage, you get $300,000 back of that for that investment. And normally, local governments weren't able to take advantage of those. Now they can. And it's going to really create a new marketplace for all of this clean energy work. I truly believe it's probably the biggest unsung hero in all of these laws. The cool thing is you can also combine it with tax credits and other grants, loans, and incentives. So it could be a tax credit with the rebate that I talked about earlier, with maybe a utility has another incentive, and maybe, so you can really start to stack these benefits and opportunities, and there's 12 now unique tax credits available for these tax-exempt entities. You know, again, investment tax credit, you could do commercial clean vehicles, EV charging stations, electrification of your fleet, as well as obviously a lot of these generation assets like solar and storage. So really exciting. Definitely go to the IRS site for the most comprehensive FAQ and info on all of this. I am not a tax advisor. I am not a tax attorney. This is my disclaimer. Please make sure that you go to irs.gov/electivepay for the real information. And in closing, before I close, I want to make sure that you all are aware of an amazing new team at DOE to really support communities in navigating all of this stuff. And that's known as the Office of Community Engagement. I want to see Bobby Boyd, my colleague here, see if he can stand up real quick. Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Bobby. I know Bobby spoke to you all yesterday, gave you some insights on some of these grants, and I'm reinforcing. But Bobby is one of our regional engagement specialists across the country, and he's dedicated to the Midwest. The whole goal is, in fact, in October of 2022, the secretary sent out a DOCAST. Basically, it's an email from the secretary. It goes to every employee at DOE. It's called a DOCAST. And she said that I am hereby charging SCEP, this Office of State and Community Energy Programs, which, by the way, we were 3 months old at that point, so like startup, to also create a new office at the Department of Energy that supported all of DOE-wide in improving external engagement and navigating of these resources, as well as improving internal coordination with all of these offices working on place-based clean energy work. And that really gave birth to this community engagement office. We now have 25 program offices at DOE that either have a technical assistance program or have a grant that flows to communities, that supports a community transition. And now each one of those offices has a community energy liaison, and they're ongoing, almost community of practice, helping to identify best practices and tools to better engage and deliver on this, on all of these resources. And in addition to just our intra-agency inside DOE, there's also the interagency engagements. We're part of about 7 interagency working groups where we're touching EPA and DOT and HUD and FEMA and all of us working together to support specifically, disadvantaged communities with drastic economic revitalization. One of them is called the Energy Communities Interagency Working Group, and it's focused on helping communities that are going to have a closing or decommissioning coal plant or coal mining. And essentially for generations, that whole community was built around that industry. When that closes, what's going to happen? We are now going into those communities proactively, bringing technical support and thinking about what is your economic pivot going to be. It could be energy, but it could be something completely different. That's why commerce is at the table. You also need housing. That's why HUD's at the table. You also need to deal with the brownfield and the Superfund side of those coal plants. That's why EPA is at the table, right? So you have to think holistically about what it takes to pivot a community and to create generations of opportunities in the clean energy space. So OCE, this community engagement team, is phenomenal. We are regionally located, as you can see, all across the country. And the cool thing is they have office hours on a regular basis. We have a hotline you can call in at any time. We have an email address that's constantly monitored and responded to. And whether it's a SCEP program or a completely different program at the Department of Energy, you don't have to worry about that. If you have a project, you have a question, you have an idea, you go through Bobby. Bobby will help you connect to those 25 other offices and figure out who is the right person to talk to and how do we answer your problem. This is almost a concierge type experience, right? It's trying to create a concierge service for our communities to navigate all of what we're doing here. So if you're wondering where to track all of these investments and all of this impact that's happening, definitely check out the investment map on the website, energy.gov/invest. It's a fantastic tool. It dives into the details of the projects, and it really helps you understand where things are happening, where is the investment going. So definitely check that out. If you're interested in what resources you can benefit from, literally what tax credits you're available for, whether you're a renter, whether you're a homeowner, whether you're a driver, there are things that you can do to accelerate clean energy, and I want you to check out our consumer energy savings hub, energy.gov/save. We're soon going to have a similar hub for businesses and industry, as well as for communities in general. Right now, this is very consumer focused, but we also want a city to be able to come to a site and be able to understand everything that they can take advantage of, right, in one place. And so we're creating something similar like that. And certainly stay connected. If you're not following us on social or in our newsletters, you're probably not realizing that every other day there's another advancement. I'm struggling to keep up with my own stuff. I'll be frank. I'm like, I can't even keep up with my own stuff on like posting. I'm out of it. So there's so much going on. Please sign up and stay engaged. And you can go to energy.gov/bill to get announcements about all of the new money that's going out, not just in SCEP, but across the department. So in closing, I just want to, again, express my gratitude to the City of Dubuque, to you, Mayor Kavanaugh, to the council, to Gina, to our chief, and really to all of you all. I mean, I got to get driven by the chief yesterday on the way to this conference, and I'm happy to hear that there's interest in making your fire stations LEED certified and moving towards a green future. And let's say if we make one of those things happen here, I might be back in Dubuque to celebrate with you all, right? That's the goal. So thank you all again. Thank you. My pleasure. I'd like to open it up for questions and a little engagement before I get the boot here. Sir. Nice to meet you, Michael.
Urban farm.
Okay.
I consider the gateway to the future.
It's certainly the most visceral experience somebody can have with the natural world, right? When you grow your food, it completely opened my mind up.
Well, unfortunately, the environmental movement has been an apartheid movement. And how are we going to address global warming, climate change, if most of our communities, low-income, rural communities, communities of color, have been kept on the outside? And so I really think that it's incumbent that we really figure out, how do we bring people who have been historically stranded on the sidelines, how can we bring them to the front lines? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I'd like to do, there's been some great champions, folks like Habitat for Humanity. But why don't we get them, building houses for poor people might have been great in the 60s and the 70s, but how do we bring them into the 21st century? Why aren't they doing urban farm installations on all their facilities? How come they're not bringing solar to all of theirs? And that's really a way for us to really scale this whole green movement. Let's talk about organizations like Goodwill, Easter Seals.
I served on the board of Goodwill in Central Florida.
It might have been great that they realized that we must reuse. But why is it that they're not bringing urban farming on every one of their stores so that they can become urban farm installations? How come they're not bringing solar to all of those installations? So we're not really talking about aspirational. Let's talk about vocational. How do we bring these people into the 21st century so that we can really demonstrate as communities that we are advancing the sustainable development goals, that we're all in, dive, 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 Torah, Torah, Torah. And I'd be interested in talking with you about some of the things we're doing in Minneapolis and some of the things that I want to see nationally.
All right, you dropped the SDG. Thank you. Yeah, round of applause on that comment. That was great. And I agree. I think one of the big reasons why you haven't seen your Habitats or your Goodwills actually get in the movement is because they haven't been able to take the same advantage as the private sector in making this work economically, right? This all works based on economics, unfortunately, but it's true. And those organizations, if they would invest in the same solar array that a storage company across the street was investing on top of their buildings, the storage company was able to get 30% back, but the nonprofit wouldn't until now, right? So now we're beginning to see that the policy is enabling the ability for those who have been furthest behind to get in front. And hopefully you've heard that a lot of our focus from designing the grant, requiring things like community benefit planning and the thought process behind it, and providing technical assistance and really focusing in on design. As an example, for the school's design, if you were not in a Justice 40 community for your school and you were trying to apply to get money, you were null and void. It was only going to low-income school district Title I schools, period. So that's a way that we are trying to design these grants to be equitable by the standard, right? By default. So I think that I'd love to talk more. I'd love to learn more about your mechanisms, urban farming. We can chit-chat about a bunch of different ways that we're doing with fleet farming, and maybe there's things, we could both learn. It'd be great. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
It's a thing I call foster green, adopt a lot, adopt a plot, adopt a garden box. And we really got to tie the installation of these projects to big public development strategies. They're using our tax dollars. Let's drive the engine by fueling the future.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Robert Woods from Minneapolis, Minnesota, North Minneapolis. Different perspective. I believe that I like your ideas in terms of the incremental standard of getting people to where they are. And I come from one of those low-income kind of neighborhoods, predominantly black communities. And I believe that somehow we have to transition folks from being dependent on the public sector to integrate them into the private sector. So we have a different kind of philosophy. I represent another group called the Climate Reality Project, Al Gore's deal.
Sure, I'm a trainee too.
You're a trainee? I did it in 2019.
2015.
Japanese.
All right,
Okay.
Miami.
But anyway, good. We got something in common. But I really want to talk to you about, and the other people in the room. We have a thing called, and I headed up, called the International Carbon Bank, because we firmly believe that carbon credits are the new financial tool that is going to be federally regulated and will fund lots of these projects. So what I want to do is talk to everybody in the room, including you, about how we privatize it through carbon banking as a strategy long-term after these $20 billion are gone. Now, what do? So we want to talk about the ongoing kinds of things, and I want to challenge everybody in the room, because I don't want us to begin to compartmentalize into our own locations and locality. Why don't we build partnerships in this room? Why don't we start building partnerships in this room so that we can work jointly on local kinds of projects together? And the reason I'm saying that is this low-hanging fruit money is directed toward what? 40% toward
Minimum, that's the floor.
40% toward people of color, right? Low income, and I've been there before. And I know why it didn't work. It didn't work because once the dollars get on the table, you have a whole group of folks. Now this is going to be bad. I was doing good. That all they do is use the people of color economically, not who's going into that low-income home, including their improving their living conditions or school conditions. Who's getting the checks? Where's the money going? Who's actually putting it in their pocket?
Yep.
If we can't figure out a way to put those dollars in people's upward mobility, and at the same time, concurrently, you have to let some, if not a lot of the other folks who already have a lot of wealth, find a way to participate and make some money too. And that way, we can really increase the rate of our progress, and that's the challenge to you. We'll talk about it later.
Thank you.
I also want to challenge all of you guys that we're only 4 hours away. I got 290 scientists working with me, and we can work together in doing regional projects because we're real close. So that's my challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great point. And, one of the, yeah, I agree. The community benefits planning process is really trying to get to the essence of what you just said. Who is benefiting from this wealth building creation? Who is actually on the job turning the wrenches, right? And part of it is for these big projects, these hydrogen hubs, billion-dollar projects that are being landed. we're requiring that not only are they investing, but they're developing a plan and an agreement with the community on how they intend to flow those benefits for decades, right? For the project existence, right? And not just if I'm building a hydrogen hub, I need to fund my local community college to teach them about hydrogen. No. How can I also support the weatherization program? Because that dries up real quick too, and we know, right? How do we start funding urban ag and getting actual education for people to start doing this work and other training programs? So yeah, no doubt the pre-apprenticeship to apprenticeship to actual career works. And in fact, one of the grants that we have here called Career Skills Training is all focused on a pre-apprenticeship partnership between a nonprofit and developer or industry to figure out how do we actually get individuals who are potentially in Section 8 and in public housing to actually be on the job doing the improvements for the homes that they're living in. That's actually part of the Section 8 law, by the way. It's Section 3. So interesting. Would love to talk more about that, and definitely is front of mind in terms of how we make this transition. Thank you. All right. Thank you all for the opportunity.